think, one of the big things that had been really important for me and my family had been education. And so I had always prioritized being educated because my parents had prioritized being educated. And so I do remember many nights at the dining room table with my parents there to make sure that I do my homework. And right, they were sharing a lot of the big dreams about me going to college and going into some sort of profession that will, lead to me being financially secure. And then in high school, I did a lot of soul searching to kind of figure out what it is that I wanted to do. And I think one of the things that I had really learned about myself in high school is that I wanted to make a difference. And so I thought about how I could use a lot of the opportunities that I had in terms of education, because, I think I have been afforded opportunities to be like in more academically like gifted programs, or programs that were academically rigorous, and I've been told by a lot of teachers that I had a lot of potential when it came to academics, and so I really wanted to optimize and leverage that. And so one of the things that I had made sure to do was make sure that whatever it was that I decided, that I do get an education. And so that led me to applying to the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And then I got in and I ended up majoring in psychology. And so my first kind of like cross-cultural interaction was more inter-island, kind of cross-cultural thing. So what I hadn't realized is that the culture of being in Hawaii is not quite as homogenous as I had thought. And so being from Kauai, it's a pretty rural island. My hometown had like maybe 3,000 people or so living in it. I don't know. A very small town. And it was the biggest of the little towns. And so that was like Hanapepe's claim to fame. Then I moved to Oahu, to Honolulu, which has like, over 500,000 people. And that was quite the shock. So not only was it getting used to being in an urban environment, it was also being used to other like local Hawaii kids who were used to being around tons of people all the time, and also having access to a bunch of stuff. So right, like there's big shopping malls, Ala Moana, for example, that is available there. There is just a lot more restaurants and other things that are available that are really close by, versus on Kauai, right, like our only like fast food spots that were close to us were like the Subway and the McDonald's. Whereas now I had all the options in the world. I had a Zippy's, I had a Jack in the Box, I had all of these different things that were available to me, and just access to grocery stores in general just became easier. And right, like there are students who had then were from Oahu who took that for granted, and yeah, it was interesting feeling different in that way. And not having that be a common experience. And even like the pidgin that I spoke from Kauai was different from Oahu, and each island kind of had its own variant. So yeah, I learned that pretty quickly. But I settled into that, and then ended up making a lot of friends through classes in Filipino, actually. And so we were taking the Filipino language class, but part of the class was also being part of the Filipino club. And so we were, it was a great way to be able to meet other Filipino folks or people who wanted to learn the language, and made a lot of good friends that way. That was my first kind of foray in terms of building community. But, right, in terms of where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do, I realized that I love teaching. And so I wanted to teach psychology, and so I applied for a master's in teaching of psychology, but that would bring me to Northern Arizona University. And so my friend Crystal went to NAU already and told me great things, and I was like, let's do it. We'll get off the rock, go to the continental U.S., and we will try that out. And so, yeah, that was quite a different transition. My parents came with me, and I think my siblings did too. But when we landed in Phoenix, it was August. And so when we landed around midnight, it was about 112 degrees when we landed, which is way, way hotter than Hawaii could ever get. And so when we landed, my parents, we got our luggage and we were about to go to the rental car place. My parents, I remember distinctly them saying, "This is worse than Manila. This is worse than the Philippines," and it was bad. And so we were like wondering, if it is this hot here, how hot is it going to be in Flagstaff, where this university is? We went up to the university and it was amazing. It was about 75 degrees. It was perfect weather, but it's really high altitude. So Flagstaff is almost 7,000 feet up, which is pretty high elevation. And so getting used to a climate where, right, you're using lotion and chapstick for survival because it is so dry, that getting winded by just walking upstairs. We almost passed out walking around Walmart. That was also very different for us. And then, in terms of the cuisine, the cultural foods, it was very then Southwestern, very Mexican. And so everything had chilies in it. And, my parents and I are like not afraid of spicy food, but it's just different, right? Till that point, I mean, my reference for Mexican food was Taco Bell. So it was a very different thing to think about, right? And so moving then helped me kind of get accustomed to a different culture's foods, right? And at first, right, I didn't know kind of what half the menu items were. And so I would like kind of follow, like if somebody had ordered something in front of me, I would just order the same thing, and I was just trying things out that way. I was meeting then all these other students from all over the continental US, and it was interesting to hear their stories and where they come from. But right, I was always then the more exotic one, being from Hawaii, and also being Filipino, born and raised in Hawaii, and trying to dispel this thing of me being Hawaiian, and there's a difference between being Hawaiian versus like a Hawaii local. And so yeah, I think in terms of making community, for me the strategy had been then, how do we unite on something that we have in common? And so that was grad school, right? And so a lot of us bonded over kind of the hardship that comes with being in a rigorous academic setting, and I missed a lot during that time. And so what I had to do was then kind of call upon my cooking abilities to give me tastes of home. So there's no L&L in Arizona at the time. So I had to make the spam musubi at home. I had to make the loco moco at home. All my Filipino foods like adobo and stuff, I had to learn how to make at home. And what I did was share my culture with a lot of the other students there, and they loved it, right? Like spam fried rice and spam musubis were the things that were highly requested each time that I went to any kind of party or celebration, and it was wonderful creating community that way. So yeah, I loved it, and I was ready to get out there and preach the gospel of psychology, but I was told if you want to work at a university, you need a PhD. So I decided to get one. And then found myself at Utah State University. And so that was, again, another transition. So I'm leaving the mountains and going to more mountains, but this time in Utah, where I had to learn a lot more about kind of broaching culture and being able to really get to know what your host culture is about. I knew that a lot of the folks living in Utah are of the LDS Church. I knew what a Mormon was. I was familiar with the religion. There were a lot of friends of mine who were part of the church, but it's a difference between religion and then culture. And so Utah itself has a culture, and it's embedded deeply in that is being part of the LDS Church. And so I needed a cultural broker. I had a lot of classmates from Utah who were more than willing to kind of orient me to how this place works. And a lot of, they were definitely on a spectrum in terms of being a part of that church, and I really appreciated that, you know, whether they were on the really like religious, like would be considered a good Mormon versus like a bad Mormon, that I got to see the difference in terms of the diversity of that. And then also, right, then meeting other students at Utah State University who were members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but we're also like Filipino or other Pacific Islanders, Native Hawaiian, and hearing their experiences on the U.S. continent versus back home. And one of the big things that kind of went with that were their stories of discrimination, which they kind of laughed it off and giggled about it, and I was like, well, you know, that's actually not normal. Like, you can't normalize all these like events that have happened to you that were so discriminatory, but they were like, we don't know any different. And so, and our experiences are quite similar. So, right, like if I look the way that I am and everybody else is being treated the same way, what of it? So that really kind of propelled me to do what my research is, and I think that it helped me then create community in this kind of different dimension of, you know, connecting with other POC students and learning to celebrate the things we had in common, but also really celebrate the things that made us different. And you know, whatever I didn't understand, I used that as a moment to be able to appreciate and really deeply connect with others, right? And so even these cultural brokers, as I call them, they are good friends of mine. We still keep in touch. I visit Utah often. I have been to each one of their weddings, and oh boy, do they get married. So like, it has been a fun time, that being able to get to learn about the culture and do that. And then, you know, my last move had been then here to the Bay Area, and that was quite jarring to go from rural mountain town to very crowded Bay Area, and then again learn a different culture. Now it's different, right? There's it isn't quite as conservative. It's much more heterogeneous here. There's so much diversity in the Bay Area, and so it was a very stark contrast. And I think in terms of building community here, you know, what I've learned is building community as an adult is much more difficult, right? So building community as a young professional who is getting their footing at a university had been hard in terms of then, you know, your peers are often married and have kids and have a home, and so being able to find people who are still single and or queer also, right? Like a lot of my colleagues are straight, and so it wasn't that I couldn't connect with them, but I was trying to find people who were similar to me in some ways as well, especially since I've been kind of the other person, right, like the exotic one for a lot of the places that I've lived. I wanted to find some similarity, and so I was able to seek that out. And, you know, we have colleagues in the COE who share identities that are similar to mine, and so I have found that kind of community too. I think the other thing too is then making sure the cultural differences get highlighted in terms of being able to open people's minds to different ways of thinking. So what do I mean by that? Yes, I would bring food for sure. Obviously, I would bring some of the apparel, the fashion, along with me as well. But I think one of the big things I try to highlight is that, you know, the way that it's always been doesn't have to be the way it's always been, right? So, for example, when I moved to the Bay Area, I was very confused. as to why there was so much negativity toward police, for example, right? Back home, I had really great relationships with my police officers. Officer Darla, Officer Bruno, shout out to you. Our childhood had been like we'd normalized having interactions with police officers in our community because we knew them outside of the uniform too, right? So, you would see Officer Darla running every single morning from town to town. Like basically the town that I lived to the town that I went to high school in, she would run that, right? It is a 15-minute drive to be able to get there. And so she would run that and back and rarely missed running around. Sometimes police officers would visit the park just to say hi to us, make sure that we were safe, that we weren't getting into any trouble, and we had fond memories of that. Even when we did get into trouble, as teens often do, the police officers were firm but not frightening. So, right, they would be very disappointed that we were out past curfew and made sure that we followed through in going home. But we were never afraid of our police officers, and we definitely didn't hate them. Here, I thought that was interesting, and I had to learn a lot about that kind of cultural context too, about the history of police brutality, and then that gave me this idea. It's just like that's really unfortunate if that's how that has to be, or that's how it is now. But I don't think it has to be that way, and really, that's what I think helps broaden people's perspectives, is to see that there is sometimes a system where it does work, right? If there are police officers out there from the community who are known members to the community and are friendly to the community, that kind of policing tends to work out, right? And in fact, a lot of the asks for help for the police become much more proactive, right? So even if you're not in uniform, you kind of know like where the trouble is in the community and how to investigate it and really how to help people. So yeah, I think that's the other thing. That's a very specific example, but I think bringing some of the ideas from home and bringing them here also brings another dimension, I think, of home with me. I think that one of the key things too is what made my story different is that I was an adult when I moved to the continental US, and so I felt like it was much easier for me to hold on to my identity because I have done a lot of the work back home in Hawaii, right? I knew I identified as Filipino American. In college, I did mention that I was taking the Filipino language program. That was my way of reclaiming the ability to talk, to speak Filipino, and to be able to communicate with my family members in the Philippines who, right, they either had to learn English to be able to communicate with us, or they wouldn't. And so this helped me then gain direct access to stay connected with family back home, and then really hold on to that really tightly, keep that effort really close by as I'm moving into these different areas so that could stick with me. And I know that's not always the case with folks, and especially if you are living in a place that is not so, that doesn't have a lot of your kind of cultural background represented, it gets harder to be able to do that. So I, recognize that my experience of being able to really develop a good sense of who I am, my identity, and the culture, and then hold on to that as I bring it around is not always the case. It's not always common.